My first one for you, Pastor Steve, says on the topic of evolution. He says a lot here. I don't have enough room for it. I'll just go ahead and read what he said. Well, I don't have a name, so I don't know if it's a guy or girl. They say, I have heard many pastors speak about the various flaws that go with evolutionist theories of an old Earth and even older universe. I've heard mention the problems with the magnetic field being too strong or the sun being too big. I've heard about problems with carbon dating or geological structures that do not support an old Earth that is millions, yet billions of years old. I've heard pastors talk about the gaps in DNA evolution and the lack of evidence for macroevolution. He's given you a lot to deal with on this one. The problem is I'm no expert on these, nor could I begin to become an expert. There are what seem to be reputable articles that refute these claims made primarily by creationists. I want to start trying to become an expert on at least one or two of these areas to better defend creationism. Could you steer me in the right direction as to what might be the two areas that I could begin to research myself, read the academic studies, and eventually be able to defend with well-supported and objective knowledge? And then he goes on. This actually is a good question because, when you get saved, the first area you have to go is who created the world.
Right.
So you're a science guy. When we go through Genesis, you talk about all this stuff. When you're brand new, where do you start? Like because there's so much, and maybe you're not, mind isn't a science guy. Where do you begin?
Yeah, I just began with basics. With me, the issue that settled it for me as far as evolution goes was the issue of the age of the Earth specifically. And I was in a chemistry class, and the teacher basically put up the symbol, or the chemical symbol for uranium, and then the symbol for lead, and talked about how radioactive uranium over 4.5 billion years, half of it will turn to lead, and we found rocks that are half lead and half uranium. And so the Earth has to be 4.5 billion years old. And so that was one of the things that I looked at, and I thought that was irrefutable. And I'm a high school kid at the time, and it wasn't until after I became a Christian, I walked into a bookstore at my church and picked up a book on the Genesis. Actually, it was called the Genesis Flood, and they had a chapter on radiometric dating. And so I just went to the chapter, started reading it while I was in the bookstore. And he talked about three basic assumptions. You don't know if anything's touched that rock for 4.5 billion years, taken away any of the uranium, which can be taken away, or taken away the lead. And that's called a closed system. And you don't know for sure what the process rate is, or if it's been changed, and you don't know how it started. It's like walking into a room with a candle that's been half burned. Well, you don't know how long the candle's been there. You have no idea. You have to have a starting point. It could have been lit 3 seconds ago, or it could have been lit, an hour and a half ago. You have no idea unless you have the starting point, and that was one of the points that they made. And at that point, I realized that I had not been thinking rationally in the sense of I didn't know how to think about those things, and that there were actual answers to this kind of stuff.
So on that note, for the starting points, they just make them up?
No, yeah, basically they just make them up. So we've known about radioactivity since the early 1900s. And so they've measured the half-life for a certain period of time, and they extrapolate majorly. Obviously, you're only talking about over, just a little over 100 years for even the knowledge of radioactivity, much less uranium.
Right.
And so you're going through and you're measuring the half-life of something for less than 100 years, and you're extrapolating it out over 4.5 billion years. There's some wiggle room there.
Yeah.
In the first place.
I'm a simpleton. I love your candle analogy. A candle burning, I might be able to measure the wax that's dripped down, or some burning of the wick, and try and get close. You will never know if that was a foot or 2 foot or 10 foot because it's gone.
Right.
You have no starting point.
Yeah. Well, with a candle, you don't. With a rock, you have what's left over, as long as it hasn't been touched for 4.5 billion years. So you have the material there, and so
Okay.
the analogy is a little bit different.
Yeah.
You have to assume a candle that call it, I don't know how tall candles are, a
Yeah.
foot tall candle, but you don't know if it started out of, as a foot tall candle. You have no idea. You know what I mean? And so you have some situations there, and it is a good analogy. And so when I figured that out, I realized that there were some problems with it, and then I start reading up on this stuff, and I find out that the process rate is something that can be changed. It can, obviously radioactivity can be changed with more radioactivity. And so if you have a radioactive event anywhere near something that is, you know, throwing off ions over a period of time, it's going to speed the process up. That's like, with the candle analogy, saying that candle has been burning at exactly the same rate the whole time that it's been burning. Well, I don't know if somebody turned a fan on or not, and then turned it off. I have no idea.
Right.
And if you turn the fan on, you get more oxygen. It burns quicker.
Yeah.
And so you have the same thing with radioactivity, and that's something that's been known for a few decades now. And so there's a number of assumptions that you have there. Here's another assumption: there is no rock on this planet that's 4.5 billion years old, because the rock that they were using for that information was a meteorite.
I know that. I don't even know how that's possible.
There's assumption upon assumption.
Yeah.
So they're assuming that the meteorite was part of the original creation of the solar system, and they're assuming the whole gas cloud theory. There's just a bunch of assumptions there.
So I'm
we don't
assuming
know where their meteorite came
Yeah.
from.
Well, I'm assuming they picked a meteorite because it gives them longer dates than a normal rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because there's no rock on this planet that
Right.
dates the planet that old.
Yeah. No bias there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And so again, you have that. When I found that out, that was much later
Yeah.
that I found that out, and so that is one of those areas that I have kind of boned up on, so that when I'm talking with somebody, it takes away that excuse, that whole thing with a long age. I have no idea from radiometric dating how old the planet is. I have no idea, because the numbers are all skewed. And when you look at radiometric dates of historic formations, they don't match. And so what they're doing basically is dating lava rocks. And so the assumption is that when you have a rock and it turns molten, that you basically reset the date for the radioactive isotopes. And so the way this works is uranium over 4.5 billion years or so turns into lead, and what it's doing is it's throwing off particles from the nucleus. And so when you have a lava rock, what they're assuming is, and actually they're not using uranium and lead. I shouldn't have used that example. Potassium argon is the one that they're usually using with lava rocks. And so potassium is an element, argon is also an element, but it's a gas. And so the assumption there is when the rock melts, that the gas is going to be dispersed, and when the rock solidifies, any radiogenic argon, the argon that comes from the decay, is going to be something that was there from the very start. And so that's why you go around and you date historic formations. And the problem with that is, one of my favorite examples of this is Mount St. Helens. We know when Mount St. Helens blew up. It was 1980, and it's got a lava dome. And we know when the lava dome that actually got tested by some creationists was formed. It was 1984. And so the rock the rock that they tested was only from 1984, and they got dates that were anywhere from 250,000 years to 2.2 million years. And obviously that is way off. And this is what happens whenever they date known formations, because the radiometric dating methods, the things that they use, obviously aren't working for historic formations. And so people will say things like, well, it doesn't work for rocks of young age. Well, how do I know a rock is old? unless I'm dating it? What if all the rocks are young? And so the dating method is off, is the point that I'm making. And so that is something to look into. And so there's a number of books that you could look at on this. Just a basic creationist book. We'll go through and talk to you about radiometric dating. There is a whole volume that was done not too long ago, back actually in the 2010s, by the what's called the RATE group, RATE, with ICR. And they go through and talk about radiometric dating, whether you're talking about potassium, argon, the different methods, and then radiometric carbon 14 dating, and that kind of stuff. And so that's a little technical, but you can get some basic books on that. So I would chase that one down, because that is a big problem with a lot of people. Another one that I really enjoy, another subject that I really enjoy, is the whole issue of soft tissue in fossils. And so you have these fossils, and it started out with a Tyrannosaurus rex fossil, and a microbiologist named Mary Schweitzer, who had kind of crossed over disciplines. She was working in the Hells Creek Formation up in Montana, and found a T-Rex bone, and it was too big to transport, so they cut it in half. Well, when they cut it in half, they found out the inside wasn't fossilized. That's a problem in the first place. So you got a 67 million year old bone that's not fossilized. That shouldn't be happening. And that's one of the things that I didn't know from my education, whether it was high school or college. I didn't know that you had non-fossilized dinosaur bones. And she found out that some of the tissue was pliable. She went and checked it out, and she found veins, and she found red blood cells, and they are verifiably veins and red blood cells. And she's done this over and over. Now they're finding all this soft tissue from all kinds of dinosaurs. They've gone back into museums and checked out the dinosaur bones, and they found skin, they found collagen, they found proteins, they found DNA. And all this stuff is supposed to be, some of these animals are upward to 300 million years old, and you have these organics that are supposed to have lasted for 300 million years. It's just nonsense. So I would chase that down and just have a list and have people try to explain it. And
why did it take so long for the Mary Schweitzer to find this? These guys that are digging these bones up never saw this before then? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Specifically, the Hell Creek formation. This is another thing that I found out after the fact. When they dig these bones up, they stink. They smell like death. And so that lets you know that there's organics rotting at that point. That's the only way that this happens. And so I kill an animal, I leave it out on the ground for a year, I come back a year later, it doesn't stink.
Right.
Because everything that can rot has rotted away. And the fact that they're opening up these formations and bringing out these fossils, and they still stink, should be a clue. And the reason that they don't follow up on it is because they have a paradigm. And the paradigm is that a dinosaur died 65 million years ago or more. And so the stink can't be from rot. And then, and obviously, if you believe that these animals died 65 million years ago or more, you're not going to be looking for unfossilized bone. You're not going to be looking for soft tissue. And so the reason that Mary Schweitzer did it was because she is a microbiologist, and the smell that she smelled was, she said, similar to cadavers that she had worked on when she was in grad school. And so, she just went there.
Yeah.
And so, kudos for her, because she actually acted like a scientist,
right,
in the situation. And so I would be chasing that down. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I was doing a men's retreat, and I was just talking about the issue evolution. And one of the titles for one of my studies was if evolution is true, then why do dinosaur bones stink? And so that's one that I would chase down. Another thing, and if you want to look up some articles that will help you out and kind of get you on the path to what you want to be looking at, I would be going to answersingenesis.org or ICR.org. And they're two good creationist websites, and they've got papers that are good for the layman, and then they've got papers that are much more technical, and so really good stuff. Whenever I'm looking at some of the anti-creation sites, I read some of those papers too. I'm always looking for obfuscation. And so they try to come up with reasons that proteins can last 67 million years or 100 million years, or now up to 300 million years. And they try to look for these things, and they're just patent nonsense. So one of them is that maybe iron causes proteins to not rot over 67 million years. And, okay, give them the point. That's why, when they go through and they're going to embalm a body, we don't use formaldehyde anymore. Now we use iron, right? No, we don't.
Yeah.
Because iron doesn't make iron will not work. Formaldehyde works, and that only works for a while. Iron is not good for this. And so, it's just obfuscation, and it's just excuse making. When Mary Schweitzer came up with her results, the whole scientific community that dealt with dinosaur bones was in an uproar, telling her that she that she didn't do the science right, that she basically allowed the samples to become polluted and that kind of stuff. And she, to her credit, did her science carefully.
Yeah.
And she made sure that she had her ducks in a row, and they couldn't say anything about it. And so now they come up with all kinds of nonsense excuses.
Right.
And this is stuff you can see. It's like you're looking at red blood cells. They have pictures of red blood cells, and then they try to make it something like biological. I don't know. Different types of small-celled animals and that kind of stuff to try to make an excuse. And now it's to the point where they don't have any excuses. So the whole thing with soft-tissued tissues in fossils is a great place to go to get a handle on this stuff, because you start sharing that with people who are into evolution. A lot of them don't know about this. And it's one of those things that's just in your face, and it's hard to get away from. The other thing that you might want to look at, so I'm giving you three. So radiometric dating, soft tissue in dinosaur fossils, and then the third one would be if you're gonna talk about the age of the universe and that kind of stuff, you might want to get into some stuff that has to do with starlight and time and that kind of stuff. There is a guy who is doing a really good job. He's an astrophysicist, and his name is Lyle. I believe it's Jason Lyle, and he has a book called Taking Back Astronomy. And I just looked it up, and you can get that on Amazon. And actually, he's got a number of books on Amazon. And he's got a good take on the whole cosmological problem, because that's another one that people are going to bring up. They're going to bring up the age of the Earth. They're going to bring up the age of the universe, and how do you answer those things from a biblical perspective? And so dinosaurs, age of the Earth, age of the universe. Once you get that stuff down, there's some other places to go, but you get that stuff down, and a lot of people who are reasonable are going to be convinced at this point that it's at the very least something to look into. And so I would do that.
So is the short answer that you really have to do your homework, that there's no learn these two facts and you're good to go. You really need to spend some time studying this to know what you're talking about, to be able to have a basis.
Well, just it doesn't have to take a lot. When the Mary Schweitzer stuff came out, I was picking that up in scientific articles, like in magazines.
Yeah.
And I was picking that stuff up, and then I chased it down and got some more facts. So I knew exactly what was going on at the time. And you pass that out to an evolutionist in the sense that you're in a conversation. You say, "What about this?" You say dinosaurs are 67 million years old. What about this? And you can get lists on the internet of soft tissues that have been found in dinosaur bones. Like I said, they have skin now because now they've been looking for it. And they have lists of these things and what they're dated as far as evolutionary theory goes, and it's just nonsense. And you hand a list like that to somebody, or you just go through a list, like you put it on your phone, go through a list like that with somebody, and they'll be sitting there with their mouth open, not knowing what to say.
Right.
And it will at least get the point across that maybe you ought to look into this a little bit more. Takes the fog away.
Yeah, the time that we live in now, isn't there such an overwhelming, enormous amount of evidence to the other side that, where when evolution first, the whole Darwinism thing first came out, it was tipping the scales because we were playing catch up, not knowing. Isn't it now overwhelmingly the other way? Because when you're talking about the age of the Earth, and I'm not a science guy, but when I went through that, there's a book called In 6 Days. In the age of the Earth, it wasn't just radio cover dating. They talked about red star shifts, Mississippi River Delta, the dust on the moon, and then you bring up dinosaur bones. Like, there's this overwhelming amount of evidence just for the age of the Earth.
Right,
That's one category. You immediately step into another one, like, the whole Big Bang, where first there was nothing and then it exploded, that something can be created out of nothing. You get into DNA, where you're talking about a genetic code, and you can go on and on and on down this trail of evidence that just spending a few weeks diving through this, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. We live in awesome times, and for example, just the whole issue of DNA, the fact that it's a code,
Right.
so it's like literally a digital code. So the difference between digital and analog is when you have a clock and you have hands, and wherever the hands are pointing, that determines what time it is. That's called analog. Digital is you have numbers that mean things, numbers and colons and that kind of stuff, and they mean things. It's a code, and so when you're looking at DNA, it's coded, and that means there is a language, and there's literally letters and words in the language and paragraphs in the language. These correspond to genes and chromosomes and that kind of stuff. And if that had been known at the time of Darwin, in fact, if Mendel's work on genetics, he was a guy in the 1800s, and his work didn't get popularized until after Darwin. If Mendel's work had been popularized before Darwin, Darwinism would never have gotten a toehold.
Right.
And if DNA information had been there, Darwinism would never have gotten a toehold. There's no way that you can do the things that evolution states that you can do with the information we have about the genetic code of pretty much everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was specifically because his whole premise was on a simple cell theory.
Yeah.
And we know that that's this complex factory in just that little tiny cell.
A cell is like a city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On top of the intelligent code designer, like writer of a book that's making it all run.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a number of things that you can look at when you're dealing with the whole evolution thing. From my point of view, it takes more faith. It would take more faith for me to believe in evolution than to believe in creation.
For sure.
Because it's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
The whole issue. You can't even get past chemical evolution, and it's just basic chemistry. You can't get past it, and it's the reason that everybody has stopped talking about life coming from the oceans. Having a primordial soup in the oceans. Nobody talks about that anymore. And it's because chemical evolution will not work on the Earth. That's why they're talking about the Earth being seeded from, comets or asteroids hitting the Earth and that kind of stuff. Because we can't figure out how it started here. and then on top of it, you can't get past the beginning. And once you have that, then you got problems with the whole rest of the thing, because what you're doing is you're adding information to a code, and it's all got to work. It's like adding information to a book. The book's you got to be able to read the book, and if you're going to add information to it, it has to be coherent, and it has to work with the rest of the book, with every chapter of the book, is the idea. And so it's radically complex. And again, this is stuff that I like, but you can get a good working understanding of a lot of this stuff with some of the simpler books and
Yeah.
some of the articles.
Do you know
Lots of information out there.
Yeah, for sure. Do you know,
Yeah.
are they still teaching this in the public school system, starting in high school and then going to college? Are they still on this old school Darwinian evolution, or because of the evidence, are they moving away?
I haven't gone back through and looked at that lately, but the last I checked, probably about 5 years ago, they're still using the whole recapitulation in the womb thing.
With the pictures?
Yeah, with the pictures.
So
Yeah.
if you just had a,
And that was a hoax. Like literally, they don't use pictures. We got plenty of pictures of fetuses
yeah,
in every stage of development. When you see these in your textbook, and it's the whole idea that you go through through a fish stage. Your embryo goes through a fish stage, and then it goes through a reptilian stage or amphibian stage, then a reptilian stage, and and that kind of thing all the way up. And it's a recapitulation of evolution. They don't use pictures when they're doing that. They use the original drawings.
right.
That the guy drew, that the guys drew back in I believe it was the 1800s, of all things. They use the original drawings because the pictures don't match what they want to portray
Yeah.
in themselves. So, just that is
So if
crazy.
you had what I was going to say, if you had a baseline fundamental understanding, just a simpleton understanding, and you walk into a high school thing in class, and they're teaching that, they're gonna be either blown away or ticked off because it's not even close anymore.
Yeah.
Like it's overwhelming.
I believe that if I'd have known something about the assumptions that were being made with radiometric dating, with our 4.5 billion years and uranium to lead and all that stuff, I think my chemistry teacher was pretty reasonable. I could have, if I'd have known this stuff, well, how did we know that the rock started out all uranium? And she would have gone, oh, well, I don't know, because she was that kind of lady.
Yeah.
And how do we know that the process rate's the same? Back then, she probably would have argued that. And how do we know that none of the uranium has been taken away? Because you can leach uranium away with a weak acid. So you take the uranium away, the rock automatically looks older. And so how do we know that hasn't happened? And she probably would have gone, she probably would have gave me an A for it. She liked me too. So, but yeah.
You think that would happen nowadays?
Depends on, I don't know, depends on the teacher. There's with the information that's out there, teachers don't have an excuse for not knowing this stuff.
Yeah.
And not presenting both sides of the issue. And that's how science is supposed to work. You present both sides of the issue, and
For sure.
and you come to a conclusion. You don't sit there and skew the information. Not a good thing.
All right. Well, if that doesn't give you a start in the right direction, I don't know how to help you, because that's a pretty good answer.
That's a long answer.
Yeah.
Program's half over now.
It's a science question. You should have known better. This is Pastor Steve.